I will tell you this little tidbit for you. Remember how I said that we have the soul and its ego? So Pluto's the soul, and the ego is the south node when we're looking at it, where we're coming from. I have a south node in Taurus, and that will relate to it relates to the nose and the sense of smell. When you have a lot of Taurus in your chart, it will really relate to the earth. So anybody hands me something, my first inclination, it's the nose, it's the sense of smell. And so you will notice people who have really strong Venus, Taurus, or second house can sometimes have very strong sense of smell or no sense of smell. If it's if they've got some distortions. So again, when you're looking at these 12 astrological archetypes, you're not going to know when you're looking at a preponderance of an archetype what the context is going to be. So that's something that's very strong in evolutionary astrology, is that you must have the correlation observation. You must have the interaction. I've had people who want me to, put the chart on a tape and mail it to them. I just don't do it. I just, no way, because I've got to know who I'm working with. I got to know how that soul energy is coming through there. So if I can't have a live interaction, especially like with newborns, and I like to do newborns, but I have got to have a parent or a grandparent or someone that I can start interacting with, that can start sharing information. So a lot of people who come to astrologers, they expect you, they look at you as though you're psychic. And yes, you can be psychic and be an astrologer, but you've got to have that interaction with them. And so that interaction can sometimes be visual. You can be looking at them and you can, get some clues that way. But it's also going back and forth. So in evolutionary astrology, we think nothing of it. If I'm going to read for someone for an hour, I'm going to spend that first 10 minutes or so. I've done it long enough where I can ask questions for 5-10 minutes, and just by their answers, then I know where to go. But when you're a beginning astrologer, do not be afraid of asking questions. Do not be afraid of asking how they are operating in the context of their astrological archetypes. What I've become to term it is the environmental conditioning. And so any of you who are registered students on our website, you will notice that when I teach my monthly classes every month, it's a 2-hour class. There's an hour of theory and there's an hour of chart interpretation. In the hour of chart interpretation, they have to answer basic environmental questions. What is your family background? What belief system or religion were you raised with? What was your economic conditioning? What's your relationship history? What do you currently do now? What belief system do you subscribe to today? So I literally ask those types of questions. And then as they answer, I'm already looking at the chart. And by their answers, they're giving me clues. So not only are they given an environmental context to the chart, then through asking those questions and hearing what they say, you're also being able to intuit an idea of where they are at in their evolutionary states. Consensus, individuated, and spirituated. And so there's a very strong interaction that has to take place between the astrologer and the person who comes in wanting to receive their information. All right? All right, where were we when the tape first left off? Anybody remember what we were talking about?
We were talking about
Pluto by house and sign, thank you. Yep. The dual archetypes.
And repeating things.
Was the Pluto by house is your
Individual.
Individual, and the Pluto by
Yes.
sign is the generation?
Yes, yes. So, you know, we've been talking about the Pluto in Libras, whose lessons are the Aries polarity, the Pluto in Virgos, whose lessons are the Pisces polarity, the Pluto in Leos, whose lessons are the Aquarium polarity. So Pluto by sign is your generational lessons, and this polarity point is your Pluto by sign, natally, is where the generation is coming from. The polarity point is where the generational lessons are. Pluto by house is where the soul is coming from by way of individual soul. And then that polarity point to the opposite house are the lessons that the soul is intending to learn. And so for each soul, there's going to be the generational stuff and the personal, individual stuff. All right? This makes sense for everybody in regards to that? Now, because we've talked about Pluto and the nodes, the ego, the soul and its ego, there's variations to this looking at Pluto in your natal house and sign, all right? The variations are when the nodes of the moon start interacting with Pluto. And so, if it's okay, I'm going to erase this and I'm going to give you guys some more concrete examples, especially with Moon in Gemini. You see what the Moon in Gemini is doing to all my Sag archetypes? So I think we can get over this well enough to look at this. All right, do not mind circles today, okay? Many years as I've been drawing circles, I can't say that I draw very good circles. I think you'll recognize it.
Well, if you haven't drawn a perfect circle, and I'll have you this 2-degree Pluto Virgo. Waiting on the perfect circle.
We got the Moon in Gemini. Let's put Pluto in the 9th, okay? When we have a 9th house Pluto, all right, that means the lessons are down here in the 3rd house, all right? This is the Sag house, 9th house, Sag house, for example. You know, so this is a soul who spent many lifetimes in past lives really trying to understand philosophy and may have incarnated itself in a variety of different belief systems or religions trying to figure it out. Can you understand how this would be where the soul would relate? And if you have a 9th house Pluto, many times the lessons are down here in the 3rd house, the Gemini house. Typically they have to learn there's a relativity of truth. Wherever they're at in their expansion of consciousness, there's also always another step. So somebody's always going to be over here, 3rd house, busting their bubble to try and help them understand that they don't have the whole works yet. All right? Now, that 9th house Pluto, the variations that will come in with the nodes is what if, we're just going to use some examples here. This is the south node, all right, if you can't see that. Variations to the Pluto formula is if the south node is conjunct Pluto, and this can work on either side. I just drew it on one side, but the south node on either side. When you find Pluto in the south node conjunct, there's 3 possibilities, all right? This soul is either in a relived situation, south node, the past, the ego of the past. When the soul and its ego from the past, south node, are conjunct, there's 3 variables. It's either in a relived situation or it's in a fruition situation. And here's the difference. If it's relive, it means they didn't get something and they're coming in and they're almost having to do it again. Or they've put so much effort into this that it's a signature that it's fruition, reward. Or the third variable, which is usually the most common variable, is a mixture of both. And when you find Pluto conjunct that south node, it will increase the effort that needs to be made over here in the polarity point. Which, if you have this polarity point down here, I'm going to put PPP, Pluto polarity point, and you've got a north node down there, okay? Lots of times there is an effort that needs to be made to go forward. Can you see if it's the relive situation? They've got to redo something. They can feel when the south node is conjunct Pluto, it can feel like you're stuck in the past all the time. Variables would be if there's some planets down here with the north node to help move them forward. Now this is true for any planet conjunct the south node. We're talking the soul and its ego here, but if you had another planet that was conjunct the past node, let's just say, for instance, instead of Pluto, we had Venus here, conjunct the south node. All right? If you have another, anytime you see a planet, Venus. Anytime you have a planet conjunct the south node, there's three variables that can exist with the ego merging with this planetary archetype. In regards to Venus, this is going to be the archetype of self-reliance. This is going to be the archetype of our essential needs. This is going to be the archetype of relating, relativity. Again, with conjunct the south node, it is relive, fruition, more common, a variety of both. So sometimes when you see an artist come through with an extreme amount of talent, or sometimes a child prodigy, you'll find a planet conjunct that south node. You'll find something conjunct that south node. All right? In this case, if we had Venus conjunct that south node, there could be relive with relationships. Can you see that? Another variable is you could find a soul, Venus conjunct the south node. They could come in and they meet their lifelong partner in 3rd grade and they're together an entire lifetime. Fruition. And then the most common variable is the combination of the two. Okay, so this is true not only of Pluto, but you can take other planetary archetypes. And that's how you can have a deeper understanding when you have a planet that's conjunct that south node. All right? Let's go back to this Pluto archetype now, and let's put it back in the 9th. But now, Pluto is going to be conjunct the north node. All right? Whenever you have the north node conjunct Pluto, then that variable is Pluto will represent where the soul is coming from by way of the past. And the north node conjunction will mean that the soul is meant to carry on and learn the lessons in this specific sign and house. It means that the polarity point does not come into the issue or into the picture except in a relatively minor role. All right? That makes sense? Don't worry, honey, you're fine. So Pluto in the 9th house, in this case, we have a soul who's come from lifetimes of philosophical understanding. And a 9th house Pluto can be very typical. You have a soul who ends up in a country other than the one they were born into. Or they end up in a belief system different than the one they were born into. You know, there's all kinds of variables. But when Pluto's conjunct that north node, and if we put it in the 9th house, this is a soul that has been looking philosophically for quite a while, but it's not done yet. That north node says they're meant to keep learning their soul lessons in this house when Pluto is conjunct that north node. Okay? If we had Pluto down here in the 4th house and the North Node conjunct, this has been a soul who spent lifetimes trying to get emotional self-reliance, the 4th house, Cancer house, and they're meant to keep learning the lessons in there, that house, and the sign, whatever that is. Okay, so those are some of these variations of Pluto and the nodes. And there's one more variation. And that variation is when Pluto is square the nodes. Okay, let me back up. Just as an aside, when you have another planet conjunct the North Node, that planet is then supposed to keep working in that area. Yes, you can go over to that polarity point. Yes, you go over to that opposite, okay? But that same thing, a planet conjunct that North Node, that planet is being pushed to continue developing that way with the ego. The other variable is going to be when Pluto is square the nodes, and this is also going to be true of planets square the nodes. And this is an area where I also like to do a lot of work in astrology. Planets square the nodes are fascinating. When you have when Pluto is halfway between the two nodes, North Node, South Node, you have a phenomena that we call skip steps. Skip steps. And what that will mean is, in this case, Pluto, but it's also true with other planets. It means whatever planetary archetype is square the nodes, it has not completely learned all the lessons, and there is a skipping back and forth. And also how I will sometimes describe this is not only skip steps, repeating steps, reliving, coming back. And what will have a tendency to happen is that whatever planetary archetype is involved, in this case, let's use Pluto as the example, the soul. There's a skipping back and forth between what's represented by the two nodes. And whenever it gets too hot and heavy over here, we run over here. And then when it gets too hot and heavy or scary, we run back and forth. So there's a back and forth. It's skipping around. But it's never really completely integrating or learning the lessons represented by the nodes in their signs and houses. So when you have a planet that is halfway between the two nodes of the moons, which are always opposite each other, you have to find what we call the resolution node to work your way through. And the resolution node becomes the bottom line factor that's utilized in understanding all that energy involved and grounding it and incorporating it so that you can move through whatever has got you running. Now, back to what Ben was talking about a little earlier. The mean motions of the nodes are retrograde. So in other words, when we put the houses in, you guys all know, oops, I'm starting the wrong way. Gemini is really working its thing on me. So you know that the houses go counterclockwise. The mean motions of the nodes reverse and go in a clockwise direction. All right? So when you want to find out the resolution node for planets square the nodes, you will start with the planet. And you want to go the same directions as the nodes, which is clockwise, which is reversing through. And you go clockwise till you find the first node. All right? And that's the resolution node in a clockwise fashion. Some astrologers will say, imagine you're the planet standing in the circle and you go to your left. I like to say you just go clockwise. You just go the opposite way that you typically do as the planet's transit. And you find out which node is first. In this case, the resolution node for Pluto, out of this skipped mess right here is the south node. This is the node that must be concentrated on in integrating whatever they're skipping around with. So let's take this into an actual example for you guys, okay? And let's just work with Pluto in the ninth, all right? And square these nodes, all right? So we know this is the Sagittarius house. We know that this is a soul who's been coming through lifetimes of philosophical searching, lifetimes of trying to develop the right brain, ninth house, and understand the universe in larger and larger cosmological pictures. Their ego has went back and forth between the south node in the sixth, left brain, Virgo. This is the Virgo house ruled by Mercury. So we'll start to bring in left brain right here. Versus the 12th house over here, which is ruled by Neptune. All right, so you can understand that this 6th, 12th, or Virgo, Pisces houses, all right? Virgo will always see the cup half empty, so the lack of perfection, all the imperfections. 12th house is the last of the houses, Pisces, Neptune, so this is the wholeness, all right? You put this in practical terms, and we're bouncing back and forth between the left brain and trying to be aware of everything in its totality, all right? What you can typically have if you put the nodes here is south node right here. The ego of the past is very left brain, very critical, very dissected, tear it to pieces. What's wrong with me? I'm not good enough. There could be a masochistic tendency. Could be distorted into sadistic energy as well, which means that someone who could, you know, inwardly critical, outwardly critical, you know. So you've got all that energy. So you have this philosophical soul that bounces back and forth between getting into all the details and checking out. Getting into all the left brain analytical stuff, and then when it gets too hot and heavy over here and they have to follow through and they have to evolve and they have to put a practical effort in, Virgo 6, practicality, making the effort. When it comes to making the effort, gets to be too much, this would be a soul that would run over here and take up a new addiction. And then when they burn themselves out on alcohol, they go, okay, I'm going to go to AA, and I'm going to make an effort, and I'm going to start eating right, I'm going to take care of myself, and they do it for so long, and then they decide that they're going to go over here and be addicted to something else. Or, so in other words, there's many, many examples, all right? But so you understand that this one here, this south node, is coming from an orientation where no matter what I do, it isn't good enough. Okay, I'm going to make the effort, I'm going to try and do it, you know, all that kind of stuff. And you could put the north node over here, and they could either just check out, or they could just go, I'm not going to do anything, I'm just going to float. All right, so you see how this works around like this, all right? Because this is the south node now. This is where that ego's coming from, all right? And yet this is going back to the past. When this is the resolution node, south node, it means the soul must go back to the past, go back to the ego of the past and make the Virgo effort to clean up in order to really be able to come over here and evolve and spiritualize and find that wholeness they want in human consciousness in whatever way. All right? This makes sense? With this, now let's flip this around. And what would happen if this was the resolution node? They would find that they keep going back to the past. They don't want to go back to the past. They just want to go over here and float. They don't want to come back here and make the effort. All right? Oh, that looks like a node, doesn't it? All right, now let's flip this around, okay? Now let's say that the south node's over here in the 12th house. And I got my houses right, don't I? And the north node's over here in the 6th, okay? We still got a philosophical soul. But instead of coming from a past where they would beat themselves up, where they would be self-critical, where they would try and just really get into all that Virgo left brain process, if the south node's over here in the 12th house, you see how this makes it more right brain where this person is coming from, all right? And so they're coming from a past where, you know, they were more floaters. They were more just, what's the path of least resistance that I can make here? Very right brain soul. How can I, you know, they would just check out. They would go over here and make a little bit of an effort, and then they'd come back over here and go, okay, that was nice. Now I'm just going to float a little while again. You know, but here's the resolution node again. Again, same spot. You go clockwise from the planet. So here, now we have the north node, all right? Now instead of that south node example, they had to go back to the past and relive it and make a real effort to clean up the past. In this case, when the planet square, the resolution node is the north node, now they have to make a consistent effort on a practical level in their day-to-day life each moment as they're moving forward, north node. All right? So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is when a planet square the node, when the resolution node is the south node, there's something about the past that that planetary archetype has to go and clean up. When the resolution node is the north node, there's something that they have to make the effort to go forward with. And that's how they'll clean up the past. Both the past and the future are involved in both of those examples. Now, one of the things that I have found in evolutionary astrology over time is, again, you can look at this planetary method of chart interpretation, Pluto, South Node, ruler, trinity of the past, and polarity point, North Node, ruler of, you know what I'm trying to say. Gemini's really doing this. You've got this way of looking at the past and the future, or where the soul's trying to go, all right? And once you've made some effort in working with Trinity of the past, Trinity of the future, then one of the next things that you'll really see as an evolutionary astrologer is whenever somebody has planets square the nodes, that's the stuck points within that soul. That's where that soul cannot seem to move forward. And not everybody has planets square the nodes. They'll still have the past, Trinity of the past, Trinity of the future. Every chart will have that in some way, whether it's one of these variables or the typical formula as we use it. Not everybody has planets square the nodes, but when you do see those planets square the nodes, that becomes a whole nother area where you really want to go focus on. And it does, again, it takes practice to try and get it. It was something that I worked with myself. And for some reason, I was just fascinated with planets square the nodes and trying to see how that operated in somebody's chart. So again, take your chart, take your family chart, take your friends' charts, take everybody's charts that you can get a hold of with planets square the nodes, and have the conversations and just observe them and watch them as they go back and forth. All right?
Most people who have that stuckness in their lives actually acknowledge it though, or is it like a complacency thing where the stuckness just becomes a part of their life?
Planets, it's a good point. That's a good point. When you have planets square the nodes, do they move beyond it or can they stay stuck in it?
Or do they just realize that they're stuck?
Sometimes the nodes signified in a chart, that's where a soul is stuck and they're being stubborn and they don't want to change. And that's where sometimes that the evolutionary state will come into being, because those in consensus can be stuck and they stay stuck. And again, if you're looking at planets square the nodes, what are you dealing with here? You're dealing with squares, and there's a lot of tension in squares. And so sometimes they have to bring up crises after crises after crises to try and move them past being stuck. You take somebody who's in a spirituated state with planets square the nodes, they're going to start to get it, become more conscious of it faster than, say, somebody in consensus. But sometimes planets square the nodes will represent where the soul is resisting moving forward. And so I will go in and work with those planets square the nodes when I see them, because that's where that soul is crying out for help and being able to try and get something in life to work with that. I have Uranus square the nodes. I'm married to someone who has Jupiter and Mercury square the nodes. I'm raising a son who has Uranus and Neptune square the nodes. So there's many times you can find planets square the nodes on a real regular basis. In my 25 years as an evolutionary astrologer, the planet that I find square the nodes most of the time is Jupiter. Jupiter square the nodes will attract. They're attracted to evolutionary astrology. Because think about it, Jupiter is the right brain. Jupiter, Sag, 9th house. This is the archetype of the right brain. I like to say this is our personal world and grow into it and expand with it. When you have Jupiter square the nodes, these souls have skipped steps with their belief systems. They don't know what to believe. They bounce back and forth between these different belief systems. And so they're attracted to evolutionary astrology because it shows them a way out of the confusing beliefs. Yeah, I just...
Sorry, what orb do you use for a skip step?
What, Pearl?
Orb.
Okay, the orb. When you're looking at aspects, you know, an aspect, when the aspect's exact, and there's the applying of the aspect, and then there's the separating of the aspect. Evolutionary astrology uses very wide orbs because we work with the cycle of phases and aspects. Every planet is in a phasal relationship to every other planet in your chart, no exceptions. There may be an aspect within those phasal relationships. So wide orbs, and when the nodes, 10 degrees on either side. Use wide orbs. Yeah. Some of the minor aspects you can use lesser degrees, maybe down to 5 degrees, but whenever we're working with Pluto or the nodes of the moon, we use wide orbs because it's describing the soul and its ego. Yeah. So,
I was just curious what you thought of you said you had Uranus.
Uranus square the nodes.
Square the nodes,
You know that Reader's Digest version of coming through consensus and individuated to get to first spirituated where I naturally reside? That was my Uranus square the nodes. I kept trying to fit into here. I came in here, and up until the time I was 26, when Pluto went into Scorpio, I thought that my purpose was to be a wife and a mother. And I tried to fit into that consensus world. And Pluto went into Scorpio, went over my Sun, Mercury, Neptune, stellium, and my world got blown apart. So that's Uranus square the nodes, a resistance to deconditioning from the conditioning, a resistance to liberation. And then when that happened, I went through a shortened, condensed time period where I went from that extreme to that extreme in about every area of my life. Yeah, nobody can believe that I spent the first 26 years on a tractor. You know. So is that example? Uranus square the nodes. There's been skipped steps with the liberation of the soul. Mm-hmm.
So if somebody has, like, planets skipping both nodes, so it's like
Yes.
They don't really get a grade.
Yes. She used an example of, what if you have planets opposing each other and those planets are both square the nodes? Okay? It's not really a grand cross, okay? We can sometimes want to call it that, but there's not 4 planets. That's the grand cross. These are the nodes of the moon. It's really skip steps. And there's 2 planets that have skip steps. And they're each going to have different resolution nodes. In this case, Pluto's resolution node is going to be the north node, and the soul must consistently, 6th house, make the daily effort to move forward, okay, in its understanding of the relativity of truth. Venus, over here, which is our essential needs, is going to have a resolution node of the south node. And so Venus is going to probably keep having to go back to the past to really try and figure out what its own values are, to then know how it's got to deal with all these partners from the past that is projected upon 12th house and what they're having to deal with. So the soul has to keep consistently moving forward, and Venus and how this soul individually relates is going to have to go back and clean up the past. And of course, the Pluto-Venus opposition is really going to be lessons in self-reliance. And so you see how all this can start to work together. So yeah, you can have multiple planets square the nodes. But a fascinating archetype to look at in evolutionary astrology. And again, my next point that I wanted to cover, which I also think is quite interesting. Does this make sense before I move on? For everybody. Am I addressing what you want to know? This is going to be one of your handouts. Cycle of phases and aspects. Am I moving too fast? Okay. When you want to move into understanding aspects, and that means trying to put it all together. When you can ground yourself in the cycle of phases and aspects, it really allows you to move into interpretation. Because remember I said every planet in your chart is in a phasal relationship to every other planet? These are the 8 phases. And again, everything's starting over here from this 0 degree mark, okay? But what you do is the circle of 360 degrees is divided into 8 45-degree pie-shaped segments. And you can see on the handout that I gave you, this work originally came from Dane Rudier, and Jeffrey took it up and ran with it. And I've never really, Jeffrey Wolf Green, the gentleman who brought evolutionary astrology through and all his Piscean dreams. I like to say I applied the Virgo filter. But I've never seen other astrological methods really work with this, and there's some that are starting to pick it up and recognize a square is not a square. Is it a crescent phase square, or first quarter square, or is it a disseminating square or a last quarter square? All right, because that's 4 different squares that we just described, and when you can recognize that, then that takes the guesswork out of a lot of the interpretation with aspects. When you can just ground yourself in the cycle of phases and aspects. And these 8 phases, you will also see from your handout, go from, excuse my American pronunciations. Yang, yin, yang, yin, yang, yin, yang, yin. Energy moving outward, energy moving inward. Outward, inward, outward, inward, outward, inward. And so just learning that, okay? So whenever you're looking at any two planets, whenever you're working with any two planets, how you find their angular relationship is you always start with the slower moving planet. And you move in a counterclockwise fashion to the faster moving planet. The exceptions to the rule, and these are the second and third pages of your handout. Everything compares to the sun as the center of our solar system. So I gave you some examples on how to find those aspects. Every planet's compared to the sun. And then that third page of the handout is how do you find the angular relationship of planets to the nodes. We've already been going over that. You start with the planet and you go in a clockwise fashion till you get to the node. So it's there on paper, which you can take and review and work with your own charts with to get grounded in that. So I'll do some actual examples for you, all right? But first of all, just conceptually, working with these 8 phases, as you look at those handouts that I show you, can you see new phase, crescent phase, first quarter, gibbous, full, disseminating, last quarter, basalmic. New phase, 0 to 45 degrees. This means that any two planets in a new phase relationship, it's a new cycle. So there's lots of freshness. There's a strong desire for freedom. This is Aries and half a Taurus. Strong desire for freedom. Strong desire to try and do something a different way between whatever two planets are involved. When it gets to crescent, it means there's been enough initiation of the new, energy moving outward, experiences, random experiences. Crescent is yin, so now the energy must come back inward, and we've got to try and coalesce all that new energy and energize it to come back out again at first quarter square, because your 90-degree mark is known as a crisis in action. So by the time you get into the first quarter and energy comes back outward, that's where the manifestation of whatever the impulse was back in new phase must come out, must be manifested in a new way. And then from that first quarter, gibbous phase means, again, energy. This is one of the basics, and I'll back up because this is also a good one to be able to get. We hear this a lot in astrology. Polarities, qualities, and elements. You've all heard of those. Polarities is the harmonics of 2. It's taking the circle, or the 12 archetypes, and dividing it by 2. And the 2 polarities are active, passive, masculine, feminine, energy moving outward, energy moving inward. All right? Your qualities. Your qualities take the 12 archetypes and divide them by 3. Cardinal, fixed, mutable. Cardinal initiates, fixed sustains, and mutable adapts and releases. 4 elements: fire, earth, air, water. Fire is spirit, earth is physical, air is mental, and water is emotional. So when you're working to learn the 12 archetypes, figure out the polarity, the quality, and the element. Aries, is active cardinal fire. See how that just described, you can extrapolate how that describes that. Simple words, but again, take those words and apply them. All right? And so that can really help you with this division of the circle and getting the 12 archetypes. So when you come back to these 8 phases then, all right? That first quarter phase, that 90-degree mark, is a crisis in action between the past and the future. And by the first quarter mark, there's got to be some manifestation of the new in a concerted effort. But that energy that we now have gotten, that can be full of ourselves, that contains that 120-degree first quarter trine. Energy can't always just continue to move outward. It's got to be brought back in and understood. So we've been able to manifest the new here in first quarter, crises in action, about getting it out. You come to the gibbous, and now you've got to internalize that energy that you've been able to manifest, and you've got to internalize it in order to come out at the 180-degree halfway mark of balancing it between yourself and others, yourself and the world. So you can't just go out there and gel your new energy and be able to manifest it and think you're just going to go out there like Leo, hey, here I am, everybody. Virgo follows to say, ooh, but you've got to adjust that to what the rest of the world is looking for, or recognize you're not alone in the world, to then come back out here into the full phase and share it as an equal in the world. Okay? And we're learning how to really understand it in context of ourself and now others. And when we understand it with others, we're Libra to halfway through Scorpio here. When we're understanding it in concept of ourself and others and really recognizing that energy both ways, me, them, then when we get to the disseminating phase, this is called the been there, done that phase. Oh, I know how to do this. Now we have to disseminate it and share it with the world because we've become an expert. Last half of Scorpio, Sag. And then we move over into that last quarter phase. This is the 270-degree mark. And this is the crises in consciousness, as Dane Rudier called it. And this is where we have the crises about what's it all mean? I've done it all, and now what's it mean? This is the point where we have to release and let go. Whereas the first quarter mark was a crisis in action to bring it out and manifest it. The last quarter mark is a crisis in consciousness where we have to release what we've manifested. And many times we don't want to release it because we've built up all the security around it. Been there, done that, know it, I'm an expert at it, you know. Don't want to let go. I like my security, Capricorn. But we have to let go. And so as we learn how to then, at that last quarter, crises in consciousness, crises over the beliefs of it, and we have to learn what to keep and what to let go. Then we move to balsamic, and that's the return back to energy. That's the return back to source. That's the return back to what we call the spirit and the ideals. So can you just see how we went through the circle from the 8 phases? That was brief. We could do a whole day on 8 phases.
Is this with transiting planets, or is it with your rooted planets in your natal chart, or both?
Both. You can use the cycle of phases and the aspects contained in the phases with the natal planets. Always making a slower moving planet at 0 point and moving counterclockwise to the faster moving planet. So you can do it natally, but if you have transits to natal planets, here's how you understand. Here's how you understand what it means. And with transits, whatever that natal planet involved is, that becomes the 0 point, and then you go around to wherever the transit is. Yes, so it will work with both, Ben.
So the aspects on that chart, do they roughly line up with the archetype of the house as well, that it would be?
Roughly.
Roughly.
Roughly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a way to help you with beginning to understand it. And if you want to follow some of our ancient, you know, the Celtics, you know, we all know spring, we all know the equinoxes and solstices, the cross-quarter points, okay? If we made this the spring equinox, okay, this would be May Day. Okay, and what are the spring rituals that come with May Day? The maypole thing is how I know it, but there's a word for it, and I'm not that good at my Celtic stuff. And then this would be, you know, the summer solstice, and then this would be August 1st, which would be the harvest festival for the cross-quarter days. And then this would be the fall equinox, and this is All Hallows Eve, November 1st, 2nd, more or less. And then this is the winter solstice, and then this is Groundhog Day. And what did our ancients do? February 1st, that was always when they would do all their forecasting for the year to come. That would then start the manifestation. So that's how you can see, related again to the Celtic calendar, and the equinoxes, solstices, and recognizing what I'm doing, and the cross-quarter days. And you can just see how each of those can relate to those 8 phases as well. And so then when you want to go understand a crescent sextile, the waxing sextile, you can understand what it means from within the crescent phase. You know, and then you can go and understand that first quarter trine, the 120 degree mark, this is a building energy and moving it out. That's different than the disseminating trine at 240 degrees. Okay, so the first quarter trine at 120 degrees is the manifestation of self. The disseminating trine at 240 degrees is the rewards from society. So you can see how you can then take those individual aspects, you know, and understand them within those 8 phases. And then when you get grounded in these 8 phases and all these different aspects as they go through the cycle from beginning to end, then you can add planets on, and you don't have to be confused between 2 planets square each other. Oh, is it a crescent square, which is before 90 degrees and the energy is more inward and frustrating because we want to change with those 2 planets and bring something new out? Or if those planets are 95 degrees and they're a first quarter square and it's yang energy, and boy, that energy's coming out. It's not as frustrating because it got past exact and it manifested. So you can tell the difference between the difference between the squares. Another common example is oppositions. Is the opposition gibbous phase and an internal opposition? Or is it full phase and external opposition? Yin, yang. And that's how you can understand that confusing energy between planets that are opposite each other and trying to balance each other. All right? A gibbous phase opposition is like a Virgo opposition. It's a more of an internalized opposition. And what is it that I have to change between these 2 planets back and forth, that I have to balance between them, that I can then go out in the world balancing that energy? Versus a full phase opposition, okay, where I've come through the gibbous Virgo adjustments, and here I am, Libra, really working out there to balance those 2 energies. And a full phase opposition means you've done more work trying to balance those opposing planets, and you're learning how to balance those and incorporate them. The gibbous side, less than 180 degrees, you still have things to work with. And many times what you're looking at the 180 degree mark is what needs to be thrown off in order for there to be balance. Okay?
That's the gibbous phase, what you need to throw off.
Both all the way through this, all the way through the oppositions is what needs to be thrown off in order for there to be balance. And thrown off means what of the ego of self, first half of the zodiac. Okay? What about self must throw off something in order for others to be in balance? And again, that gets extrapolated between the planets involved. Okay? Getting this conceptually? This is another one we're going through fast. This is making sense? But this is how you take the cycle of phases and aspects and really be able to simplify it.